For exactly 30 years, he was the untouchable architect of global joy. He was the golden boy of the 1990s, the billion-dollar box office king of the 2000s, and the undisputed, universally beloved anchor of Black Hollywood. His smile was a trademarked weapon. His charisma was an industry standard. But on the evening of March 27, 2022, in front of an estimated 15 million live viewers, the most likable man on the planet walked onto the stage of the 94th Academy Awards and violently dismantled his entire legacy set. Says. He didn't just strike a comedian on live television. He broadcasted the terrifying, deeply buried version of himself that he had spent his entire adult life desperately trying to outrun. The man who had built a $350 million empire on the promise of relentless positivity suddenly proved that the facade was entirely hollow. How does a boy who grew up swearing to God that he would never replicate the domestic terror he witnessed in his childhood home end up doing exactly that, entirely unprovoked, on the biggest night of his professional career? The slap was not the beginning of his downfall. The slap was simply the absolute, inevitable collision of a 50-year psychological performance finally running out of oxygen. He was the greatest actor of his generation, not because of the movies he made, but because of the mask he never took off. To understand the violent collapse of the ultimate Hollywood king, you cannot look at the Dolby Theater. You must look back to the cracked, freezing sidewalks of West Philadelphia in the late 1970s. Long before the private jets and the tailored Armani suits, Willard Carroll Smith Jr. was a terrified boy living in a household dictated by the unpredictable, volatile, emotional weather of his father. Willard Sr. was a refrigeration engineer who ran his home with a suffocating, militaristic precision. He was not an absentee father, he was an aggressively present one, but his presence carried a heavy, terrifying volatility that could detonate without a single second of warning. Young Will watched in silent, paralyzed terror as domestic conflicts between his parents erupted into the kind of violence that forces a child to grow up overnight. He learned a brutal survivalist mathematics very early on. If he could keep his father laughing, his father wouldn't hit anyone. Comedy was not a creative outlet for the young boy in Overbrook. Comedy was psychological armor. He became the loudest, funniest, most magnetic kid on the block because being invisible in his neighborhood meant becoming a target, and being boring in his living room meant danger. He weaponized his charm to diffuse the tension of his own existence. His deeply religious grandmother, Helen Bright, once pulled him aside, handed him a journal and told him, "Boy, you have a gift. You don't waste it." He listened. By the time he was 17, he ignored an invitation to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, grabbed a microphone alongside DJ Jazzy Jeff, and decided to bet his entire existence on the music industry. At first, the bet paid off with blinding speed. By 1988, they won the first ever Grammy Award for Best Rap Performance for Parents Just Don't Understand. But the music industry is a ruthless predator to the financially uneducated. The millions poured in, and the teenage boy spent it with the desperate, panicked enthusiasm of someone who believed the money would vanish by morning. He bought a fleet of luxury cars, draped himself in heavy gold jewelry, and funded a massive entourage. He was entirely right about the money vanishing. By 1990, the IRS seized his vehicles, emptied his bank accounts, and handed the 21-year-old kid a staggering tax bill of $2.8 million. He was completely bankrupt, facing potential federal prison time, and humiliated. It was in this exact moment of absolute desperation that NBC executive Quincy Jones handed him a lifeline at a Hollywood house party, a television sitcom about a street-smart kid relocated to a wealthy mansion. Will Smith signed the contract because he had literally no other choice. The IRS was knocking at the door. He didn't step into television for the art. He stepped into television for his survival. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air did not just save his life, it completely reprogrammed it. Over 6 seasons and 148 episodes, he transformed from a broke rapper into a global television icon. But the most defining moment of the series occurred in Season 4, during an episode where Will's fictional father abandons him. The script called for a standard emotional beat, but Will Smith completely bypassed the written dialogue, tapping directly into the unhealed trauma of his own childhood. When he looked at actor James Avery and screamed, "How come he don't want me, man?" He was no longer acting. The crew wept silently behind the cameras. The studio audience froze. The 24-year-old was bleeding real, unmedicated pain onto a network television set. It was the absolute proof of his genius. But it was also the absolute proof of his unhealed wounds. When the show wrapped in 1996, he launched into the most aggressive, unprecedented box office run in the history of modern cinema. Bad Boys, Independence Day, Men in Black, Enemy of the State. He commanded $20 million paychecks and generated over $5 billion in global ticket sales. He was the undisputed king of July 4th weekend. But beneath the staggering wealth, the private reality of Will Smith was entirely consumed by a manic, compulsive need for external validation. He had never stopped performing. He carried the trauma of West Philadelphia into every movie set, every boardroom, and every romantic relationship. In 1997, he married the fiercely intelligent independent actress Jada Pinkett. Together, they built an empire. They were the ultimate blueprint of Black Hollywood excellence. They walked the red carpets in synchronized designer gowns, raising a family that looked utterly flawless to the outside world. But behind the heavy wrought iron gates of their Calabasas estate, the marriage was suffocating under the weight of Will's relentless, unyielding demand for perfection. He was performing the role of the perfect husband and the perfect father with the exact same frantic energy he used to perform for his volatile father. He needed Jada to be dazzled by him. But Jada was the one woman on earth who refused to play the role of the awestruck audience member. She saw right through the armor. She saw a man who was utterly terrified of stillness. The golden illusion of their marriage began to silently fracture. Two deeply ambitious, fiercely strong-willed individuals found themselves trapped inside an institution that demanded a level of quiet vulnerability that Will Smith was fundamentally incapable of providing. Ambition builds an empire, but it burns down a home. The ultimate crack in the foundation was broadcast to the entire world in August 2020. The world was locked down by a global pandemic, and Jada Pinkett Smith sat across from her husband at a metallic red table for her Facebook Watch series. In front of tens of millions of viewers, she publicly confirmed her romantic relationship with August Alsina, a musician nearly 20 years her junior. She stared directly at the man who had conquered Hollywood and coldly referred to her affair as an entanglement. The internet exploded. The memes were merciless. The image of Will Smith sitting at that table, his eyes red, his face locked in a strained, agonizing mask of forced understanding, became a cultural punchline overnight. For a man who had spent 50 years obsessively controlling his narrative and presenting an image of total invincibility, the humiliation was absolute. He had agreed to a modern, open framework of marriage. Intellectually, but emotionally, the public emasculation gutted him. He was a man who needed the world to love him, and the world was suddenly laughing at him. The protective armor was gone. The machine was broken. The entanglement did not destroy his marriage, but it entirely destroyed his psychological safety net. This was the incredibly fragile, deeply volatile emotional state of Will Smith when he walked into the Dolby Theater on the evening of March 27, 2022. It was supposed to be his coronation. After 3 decades of relentless grinding, he was the absolute favorite to win the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Richard Williams in King Richard. He arrived carrying the weight of his unhealed childhood, the global humiliation of his marriage, and the desperation of his entire career. When comedian Chris Rock took the stage and delivered a throwaway joke about Jada's shaved head, a consequence of her painful battle with alopecia, the camera cut to Will. He initially laughed. It was the automatic default reflex of the Overbrook kid trained to smile to diffuse tension. But then he looked at Jada. He saw the tightening of her face. He saw the quiet, dignified wound of a woman who had already been dissected by the media. In that precise fraction of a second, the 50-year performance completely collapsed. He did not see Chris Rock. He saw the ghost of the violence he had sworn to protect his family from. He stood up, marched the 40 feet across the stage, raised his right hand, and slapped Chris Rock across the face with a sickening, audible crack. The immediate aftermath was the most surreal sequence in television history. The room of 3,000 Hollywood elites fell into a paralyzed, breathless silence. Will Smith walked back to his seat and screamed twice with raw, unhinged fury, "Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!" The illusion was dead. 40 minutes later, the Academy called his name for Best Actor. He walked back onto the exact same stage, tears streaming down his face, clutching the golden statue, and delivered a rambling, deeply dissociated speech where he compared himself to the fiercely protective father he played in the movie. He invoked God. He called himself a vessel of love. He transitioned from committing a violent assault to preaching about divine grace in less than an hour. It was a chilling display of a man entirely disconnected from his own reality. The world watched a psychological break broadcast in 4K resolution. The industry execution was swift and merciless. Will Smith was forced to resign from the Academy. He was slapped with a draconian 10-year ban from all Oscar events. Major studios immediately paused his development deals. Fast and Loose at Netflix was shelved. Bad Boys 4 was halted. The friends who had spent decades begging for a seat at his table silently vanished. The man who was allergic to silence suddenly found himself entirely alone in it. He fled the United States, traveling to spiritual ashrams in India, retreating into the total isolated exile that he had spent his entire life terrified of. The applause had stopped. The cameras were turned off, and for the first time in his 54 years on Earth, Will Smith had absolutely nowhere to run. The resolution of this tragedy did not come from a carefully orchestrated Hollywood PR apology tour. It came from the agonizing, quiet destruction of his own ego. Stripped of his box office numbers and his invincible persona, Will Smith was forced to undergo intensive, brutal therapeutic work. He had to finally confront the reality that he was not the superhero he played on screen. He had to reckon with the ultimate full-circle moment of his life. In 2016, his father, the man who had terrified him, was dying of Alzheimer's. Will had become his caretaker, bathing and dressing the man who had broken his mother's heart. He learned in those final days that his father was not a monster, but simply a flawed, deeply wounded man. And in the silence of his 2022 exile, Will had to accept that he too was just a flawed, deeply wounded man. By 2026, the landscape of his life is entirely different. He still possesses a staggering net worth of $350 million. Bad Boys Ride or Die hit theaters and proved that the general public is far more forgiving in the darkness of a movie theater than they are on the timelines of social media. His children, Trey, Jaden, and Willow, have grown into fiercely independent, artistically radical adults who do not perform for the cameras the way their father did. Jada remains by his side, their marriage a complex, battle-scarred partnership that defies every conventional tabloid narrative. But the man himself has fundamentally altered. He speaks of his wealth with the cold detachment of a man who realized $300 million cannot buy a single ounce of psychological peace. He openly admits that the slap was the most expensive, devastating lesson of his human existence. He lost the untouchable legacy, but he gained the one thing he actually needed, his humanity. The smile he flashes today is no longer a protective shield. It is simply a smile. The boy from West Philadelphia finally stopped running, not because he reached the finish line, but because he finally understood that the monster he was running from was living inside his own chest. Will Smith's journey is not a clean, digestible Hollywood redemption arc. It is a brutal, uncomfortable mirror held up to a society completely obsessed with the illusion of perfection. We demand that our celebrities act like gods, and we savagely crucify them the exact moment they prove they are only human. Look past the Oscar slap and the red table memes and ask yourself a deeper question about the armor you wear in your own life. Who are you when the audience stops clapping? Which era of Will Smith's 30-year dominance genuinely defined your youth, and do you believe the world will ever let him fully take the mask off? Drop your most unfiltered thoughts in the comments below and let us know if the burden of perfection is ever truly worth the price.